Hi everyone, welcome to what may or may not become a series of videos. I got quite a bit to do, but the weather outside is absolute bollocks, and I've done as much as I can do inside for the moment, so I thought I'd come out to the garage and have a look at my rather excessive pile of radios that need restoring. This one is the one that I've chosen to start with, and I don't know why really. It's possibly one of the uglier radios I own. I suspect that a couple of the knobs are wrong, and I'll bring you in for a close-up of the dial shortly, but it's a Rolax which was made by Jones and Sons jewellers back in the late 30s or mid to late 30s. Just looking at the dial, it's very similar to a Courtney or Columbus of around 1938-39 vintage, so that's probably going to date it. I would say that the dial has possibly come through Turnbull and Jones, who were a distributor of radio parts in Wellington here in New Zealand, and that dial is commonly seen on sets that they had. Rolax, as I said, was made by a jeweller, Jones and Sons, here in Christchurch, and they had the Rolex dealership, or at least they sold Rolex watches, and I suspect that that's where the Rolax name has come from. Rolex radios existed through the 30s with Jones and Sons. I haven't actually been able to find out what happened to them as a jewellers. There were some Rolexes post-war, but I don't believe that they had anything to do with Jones and Sons at that point. I believe they may have been Sedley Wells, which was a music store in Christchurch. And we'll talk about that at a later date. I've got some later Rolex stuff to have a look at some point. If you're interested, there is a little bit of information on vintageradio.co.nz that I've put up about Rolex. Anyway, let's take a closer look at the dial. Okay, so as you can see, the dial is very basic. The set is broadcast band only. The drive appears to be direct drive straight onto the tuning gang in the back, so it's obviously a very budget set. Looks like coverage is 50 to just over 150, which is common in the early sets, and a bit of a problem because we used to have two good music stations, oldies stations. One of them has an FM frequency as well, and for some bizarre reason in Christchurch they did talkback on FM and music on AM. Perfect for me. Bit of a stupid decision all round though, because FM is obviously a better choice for music, it has better audio quality. They've recently swapped those around, so now it's talkback. The other station that plays music is right at the top of the dial at almost 1600. So these early sets only went to just over 1500, 1550 thereabouts. So in order to get that station for Christchurch use, I have to bend the band a little bit, which you can do, but it just means that the dial doesn't track properly anymore. Okay, so I'll just zoom back a little bit. You may have noticed the really odd knob placement on this set, and the mismatch of knobs. I don't think those bottom knobs are right for the set. I think they've been put on by someone at some point. The top one has a pointer on it, so it kind of looks like it's probably right. I don't think I have that particular style of knob, but I'll have a look. So what I'm going to do is I'll reposition the camera and we'll take the knobs off, we'll pull the chassis out, have a wee look inside. So, like I say, I don't think these knobs are correct. That's interesting. That's a tone control, which just appears to be a switch. So that one's going to be volume. So it's either going to be a tone control that's a switch, or that's going to be the power on-off switch. We'll see when we get inside, I guess. It's jamming against the power cord, no doubt. Out of the way. holes in here. Alright, so that's not actually a built-in pointer on the knob. That is a pointer on the shaft, which is just horrible. Probably doesn't need to come off at the moment anyway, because that dial glass will come out with the chassis, but it looks to be pressed onto the shaft. Not quite sure how we're going to get that off at this particular point in time, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Okay, so first thing I notice is the chassis doesn't actually fit. Hopefully you can see that there, but the chassis itself is sticking out beyond the edge of the cabinet, which is pretty ugly. The screws holding it in are mismatched, so it's been out before. I do believe this was probably the budgetest of budget sets. I think this would have been built down to an absolute price point. I haven't managed to find any advertising for it. I can normally find something. Jones & Sons, from what I can recall of the advertising I found, their sets tend to be advertised in text ads, which were obviously a lot cheaper. So no pictures that I've found yet anywhere. That speaker is definitely not original. So that is, I don't know, probably a 50s roller speaker in there. Date code of 3, so it's probably 1953. So that's been replaced. So there's definitely been work in here. And that is hardwired in, so I'm going to have to take that speaker out. So you should be able to see here, this chassis was obviously designed to take round cans. The square cans came in 39, 40, just before the war, I think. You've obviously got these square cans and just punched some tabs here and then just folded them over onto this bit of aluminium that they've screwed the IF can to. That's pretty hideous, but hey, again, if you're building to a budget, I guess it makes sense. Let's take a look underneath. Actually, before we do that, space for the speaker. I don't know if this was done factory, quite possibly, because this speaker wouldn't take up a whole lot of space. An electromag speaker probably had a much deeper housing on it and would have needed something like this. It's like they've cut along this edge, bashed it back with a hammer, and then soldered it closed. Seems like a waste of solder if they were going to do it. I'm not quite sure why they've soldered it closed again. However, interesting design feature. This has obviously been added at a later stage as an output transformer. Don't quite make out the number there. I'll have a look at that a bit later on and see if I can identify it. We did have a couple of major transformer manufacturers here. And here we have the guts. Alright, so here we have it. Fairly basic little radio, nothing flash, 5 valves. Have a look, this should be the rectifier, it's an 80, no surprises there. This is probably a 6V6. 6V6 Heltron, which I think is an Australian brand of valve. Anyone from Oz watching this can correct me there. Okay, another little goat shield on here. It's actually probably the least rusty goat shield I can remember seeing in a while. This is probably the first audio. Looks very first audio, 6B8, 6B8G. This one probably the IF. Let's have that spring off there. U7. That's the IF, and this will be the mixer oscillator, which, well, okay, something. It's very nice of them to put the goat shield back on. I guess either they wanted to keep that part original, or no one told them that these metal ones are actually shielded. That's what the metal body does. The metal body on these metal tubes is connected to pin 1, and pin 1 can be earthed, and that acts as a shield. So 6A8. So we got 6A8, what was that, 6K7, 6U7, 6B8, 6V6 and an 80 rectifier. So, there we have it. Okay, where were we? So, I think this is as electrically safe as it's going to get. Certainly not what I'd call electrically safe, but probably as electrically safe as it's going to get. Excuse my arm. Just put my lamp back on the scene so I can see what I'm doing. And don't think I'm going to measure any voltages here. I'm just going to check for any out of the ordinary lighting up of that bulb on the dim bulb tester. If you've never seen one, light bulb switched off. Basically it just works as a current limiter. As the load comes on here, an equal load is drawn through the bulb up to, but not exceeding, the 60 watts that the bulb can deliver. If that bulb comes up blindingly bright, then we know we've got a problem here. You can shut it straight off. If it flares up and then comes back down and then slowly builds up to just dim brightness, then we know that things are okay and the set is probably not in any kind of electrical distress. Okay, switching on. Okay, that's probably just a little bit brighter than I would have expected it to be. So it's probably not perfect in there. I can hear some static coming from the speaker, so the audio section is working. No signal. Right, let's try. Got somewhat of an aerial here. I expect a little bit of crackling from that. That's the aerial there. Dead. Dead as a dodo. Right, so audio section's working. There's a little bit of instability there. So we'll just see if we can hunt that down. I expect, just looking in here, there's a lot of componentry that needs replaced, so I'm not expecting that it would work perfectly, but I would have perhaps expected something. I'm just going direct full voltage there for a second, just on the off chance. No, there's nothing. So, just have a quick look, make sure there's nothing obvious, see if there's anything I can find that's going to pop this back into life. That valve wasn't fully seated, the audio section's working. Do a quick B+ test. So this 2K resistor here is going to be the replacement for the field coil of the electromagnetic speaker this would have had. So what I'm going to do is turn it back on, and I'm just going to check the B+ measurement. Do that with the dim bulb tester on. So I'm going to use this earth point, the earth point on the side of the goat shield up here. So B+ of 300 volts, that seems a bit high, but that is before the resistor. $237 volts on the output. That B+ is there and it looks fine. Might check the plate and screen voltages if I can find my handy dandy RCA book. A quick look at 6v6. 6v6. Plate is 3, screen is 4. So if I can get to it without zapping myself, not easily the way it's oriented. One downside of these probes is they are quite long and quite prone to shorting out on stuff, so if I am going to poke around in there, I'll probably put a wee bit of a sleeve around it. But at present that is just, it's quite awkward to get at. So I can see that pin 1 is down here, pin 2, pin 3 is there in the clear, so I can get to that without that's 214 volts, and pin 4 is 228. So that's probably about right. So audio is fine. The problem is going to be in the RF end, and wonderful, we've just been invaded by moths. Joys of working at night with all these lights on and the doors open. So yeah, audio stage seems to be working. It could be something really simple. That instability is a bit concerning. I wasn't expecting any unstable unstable. The shield is connected. It could be the first audio. Could be the earthing on the first audio. If that's not right, sometimes they'll squeal. But at this stage, it's not working. I think what we'll do is start replacing the caps. We know that the audio section's working, we know the speaker's working, the output transformer's fine, DC voltage is fine. Actually, before we do that, let's inject some IF. So, one thing we can do is we'll stick an IF signal on here and see if we get it out. So I'll just tweak that up to 455, which is probably what this is, but no guarantees. 455, I'll turn it back on, just let it warm up. I've got that cranked up quite high. Right, so the audio section is definitely working. But there's just nothing. That's pretty much on full bore at 455. I would expect to hear something from that. We got nothing. So it could be a couple of things. Could be a dead IF valve. Given that I'm injecting it here, this is the mixer oscillator, so that's the first valve. There's no point injecting it there because if I can't hear it here, but I can hear something, which means something's getting through, but we could have a dead IF can. This valve could be crook, although I'm hearing something there. So just there, you may not hear it on camera, but I've got a very, very faint tone, very faint. Having said that, I've just adjusted across about 200 kilohertz and the tone is still there, so that's it's just the modulation that's getting through. So that's really weird. I'll have to have a bit of a think about that. I might see if I've got another one of these valves, just swap it over. Short of that, I think we're down to checking to make sure the IF coils aren't open, and after that it really could be a crook cap in the circuit there somewhere. Obviously I don't have a schematic for this, so I'm just working in sort of generalities here, but we'll replace that. Replace it and we'll see how we go. So when I say we'll replace it if we can. Forget what I said this was. 6U7. Right. Bear with me. Alright, so we've got a 6U7 here. It's completely untested. So I don't know how this one's going to perform. I have another one that I have marked as 6U7 question mark, so it looks like a 6U7. No actual evidence it is. So tweak that so the opening's in the right spot. Alright, see what, if any, difference that makes.
Don't really know what sort of virus it had,
Really?
but you know, it was pretty bad. So I think this thing's been around for quite some time.
So it looks like we had a dead 6U7. You'll notice this is actually running a little bit brighter now, or it appears to me to be running a bit brighter, so it's pulling a bit more current.
Flus and everything that I've had, so.
Explain the sudden explosion back. Test complete.
Treat your symptoms to visit christchurch-built.co.nz.
Hi, I'm Cheryl. And I'm Lauren. We're the proud owners of Dignity with Sincerity.
Alright, so you can probably hear
Owned and operated by a woman. For years
there's a bit of electrical noise there. Now I can cut that electrical noise down a little bit.
And at the same time ensuring that be well, whether big or small, formal or relaxed, our funerals
By
are conducted with
turning off the LED lighting
and brings comfort to family and friends.
over the bench, so at some point I need to do something about that. It used to be nice and electrically quiet, but just lately it's not anymore, so it's no use to me on this bench if it's going to be noisy like that. So what I've discovered is that most of the LED drivers that's as low as that'll turn off, so we got some leakage there somewhere, probably that'll be capacitor related. So most of the electrical noise in drivers, or comes from drivers for LEDs, I find, around my bench anyway. And so what I've taken to do is buying 12 volt LED strip and getting old 12 volt transformer wall warts, the old power packs. Purely transformer driven, no electrical noise to speak of, and that works really, really well, so I can have LED lighting on the bench without having to worry about all the electrical noise of a switch mode power supply. That's my workaround for that. This particular LED strip I had and I put on the bench, and it was fine. Like I said, it was great when I first installed it, but it's actually getting noisier with age. So that's going to have to go. So anyway, working. Right across the band. So that's going to be reasonably straightforward, I think. So at the next point, obviously, we'll bin that because that's keep dead valves hanging around. Next stage is going to be to start replacing some of the capacitors underneath, and then we'll give it a bit of an alignment. I may pull the old valve tester out and just test all these valves, but I tend to work on the if it's working, it's working. Particularly on sets I'm not going to listen to a lot, and 5 valve sets aren't a great deal of use out here in the country. We do have to put up with a lot of static when I'm listening to them out here, just because of the distance from any transmitter. And that last station I was listening to is probably the loudest one on the dial, and that's Magic Talkback. For me, if I'm going to listen to something, it's probably music. I'm not a big fan of Talkback. It's just a little bit whiny for my liking most of the time. And Magic Talkback is whinier than most, so even though it's the strongest station, I tend to ignore it now. So, we know what we've got to do. And right now, I'm not going to do it because it's getting a bit late and a bit dark. And I'll hit this again tomorrow when it's a bit lighter and hopefully a bit warmer and a bit less rainy, but we'll see. Alright, good morning. So back into it. One of the things I'm going to do is try and create some sort of schematic, whether it's a full schematic or just a partial one. remains to be seen. For that, I really like these cheap 4-colour pens. They kind of got some interesting colours, and if you get a couple of different ones you end up with 8 different colours that you can use. And I'll use that particularly if I'm stripping a set completely, and I'll use different colours to indicate different wires, you know, heater circuits and HC circuits and things, different components. It just makes it easier to go back and have a look at. And I have something here as an example. This is a book I tend to keep on the desk. So that's one I've done, and I have no idea actually what set that was. I can't remember. Something early by the looks of it. Had a 2A7 in it. But yeah, that's the kind of thing I'll do. There's another one. There's a Rolls set that I restored, and the notes that I took. And actually you might find that these are part of that Rolls set. That was a full restoration I did some time back, where I stripped everything. The chassis was very rusty. It had rats living on top of it. So it was completely stripped. This one's not going to get that treatment. It's going to get cleaned up as best I can in situ. I know it works, which is great, so we'll replace all the caps in it and we'll go from there. So, how do I do this? Well, let's just start at the start. We know we've got a 6A8 for the mixer. We'll go for 6A8. I know the mixer's going to be over here. Plate. Five grids. And a cathode. And draw in the details. So I'll do this off camera. There's no point you watching me slowly trace out all the valves. But the thing that I know is that it's a superhet, it's a 5 valve, it's going to be of a very common design. So I can go through, I can put all the valves, I can put the IF coils, I can put the power supply, because I know how that's going to be done. And it's not because I have some mystical powers, it's just because when you work on radios like this for a while, you start to see patterns, and the patterns are quite typical to a lot of sets, particularly the cheaper ones, where I don't know how this was designed, or if it was in fact designed, or if it's in fact a copy or something close to some kind of kit set. And I mentioned that this dial is probably from Turnbull and Jones. Well, Turnbull and Jones did produce a lot of kit sets in the 30s. Some that were actually published in magazines, so fortunately we've got record of those. So one of the things I'll do is I'll go back and have a look and see if I can spot anything about this circuit design that looks familiar, because if they got the dial from them, they very well could have, as a small manufacturer, copied or been inspired by those designs. It's unlikely they would have had a high-end electronics engineer designing their circuits for them. So, I suspect it was reasonably common in the day for smaller manufacturers to, if not take inspiration from, actually take the entire circuit from a kit set that had been published somewhere. Okay, so I'll be back shortly. G'day, this is Steve. Hey, thanks for watching the video. I'm going to stop here because I've had about 35 minutes and I think that's probably long enough for one clip. So I'll be back with the second part fairly shortly. If you enjoyed this, let me know. If you've got any comments, questions, suggestions, then put those down below. I'm certainly keen to do a few more of these. I realise that this one's probably not the best quality video you've ever watched, but it's the first one I've ever made, and I'm still finding my way around how to use the camera effectively, how to edit it. So yeah, like I realise it's not perfect, but it is what it is. Hopefully I'll get better as I do a few more of them. So keep an eye out for the next part. It should be up in a couple of days, and yeah, like I said, thanks for watching.